Now available in paperback and e-readers, Spellbound, A Darker Shade of Black. Get your copy today at your favorite online bookseller. There's been a major campaign by your Black Lives Matter and their supporters towards having Confederate statues and Confederate monuments removed from the places they were established during the Civil War. And the reason why they say they want to have these Confederate statues and Confederate monuments removed is because they pretty much are racist, and if they remove these statues, they will prevent people from becoming inspired by the alleged racism that is behind them. Now, when I listen to Black Lives Matter's arguments and their ideas regarding this campaign, they are completely backwards. Because if you understand the Civil War from a panoramic perspective, you will understand that their reasoning and their logic for having these statues removed from where they were established is completely backwards. Now, anyone who has studied the Civil War and understands all the reasons for the Civil War will tell you a completely different story about this Civil War. And when they tell you the story of the Civil War from the historical, objective, and panoramic perspective, they will tell you that slavery was only a small component of the entire Civil War. Now, the Civil War was not about freeing the slaves, as many white liberals will have you think. No, the Civil War was about the direction of the country and the state of the Union. And the reason why it was about the state of the Union and the direction of the country was because we had two different economic systems, and those two different economic systems were competing against each other. And in this war, one of them was going to go. Now, those two economic systems were this. One, we had an agribusiness model in the South, which was pretty much dominant from the establishment of the United States up until about the 1850s or the 1860s. And then, in the middle of the 19th century, we had the establishment of the Industrial Revolution. And that pretty much was established in the North, whereas the agribusiness model was dominant in the South. So you had two different competing economic systems pretty much fighting for dominance in America. And they pretty much wanted to take the country in one direction. And the Southerners pretty much wanted to maintain their way of life with their plantations, with their slaves. And the reason why they wanted to maintain their way of life with their slaves and their plantations is because the agribusiness model was the dominant economy in America from the inception of America up until about 1860s or 1870s, give or take a decade or two. But it was the dominant economy. And it was a dominant economy because the U.S. pretty much controlled the trade of imported goods such as tobacco, corn, cotton, and many other cash crops. And those cash crops allowed them to do trade with Britain, France, the Canadians, and the Germans, and even the Mexicans. So the South had many trade partners that they pretty much dealt with when they were doing their agribusiness model. However, the North was expanding at the time due to the Industrial Revolution, and many numerous inventions that had pretty much revolutionized transportation and trade in America. Now, things like the steam engine pretty much revolutionized America and the way America did business, and the invention of the steam train pretty much revolutionized the way we did business in America. And these inventions were pretty much major towards developing and expanding America, and the North was growing and expanding towards building its own economic base. And they were building an economic base and economic partners with countries such as Britain and France as well. And what was also going on in Britain and France also had a major impact on the American economy at the time. And what was going on in Britain and France was Britain and France were pretty much colonizing parts of Asia and India and building up their own cash crops in cotton, corn, and spices. And this is something that the Europeans wanted to do since Christopher Columbus. Now, if we look at American history from the panoramic perspective, you'll all understand that Christopher Columbus was originally looking to go to India when he found America. And the reason why Christopher Columbus wanted to go to India was this. They wanted to control the spice market and the cotton market back then in the 1600s. So 300 years ago, this was their plan, and eventually the British got there first, and then you had the French coming in as well, establishing colonies in these Asian countries and in Africa. So Britain and France were establishing economic basis for colonies in Asia and Africa, and they were importing their own spices to America. They were importing their own cotton to America and other places, and they pretty much did not need cotton, tobacco, and other items they used to pay through the nose through imports from America. They no longer needed American products. Pretty much the agribusiness model was becoming to go on its way out. However, the Southerners wanted to try to maintain their way of life, and they wanted to continue to maintain the direction of the country and have it continue to go on this agribusiness model. Unfortunately, because they were disagreeing with the rich Northerners, this is what led to the Southern states seceding from the United States. And the Civil War was about trying to preserve the Union and establishing one direction for the country. This is something people don't want to talk about as it relates to American history. For them, they think that the Civil War was all about slavery. No, there was a core economic factor for this war going on. Because if it wasn't for those economic reasons, they wouldn't have had a reason for a civil war. What was causing the divide was the fact that you had the country going in these two different directions, and because it was going in these two different directions economically, they decided they were going to fight to have one direction for the country. Now, slavery was a component to this, because slavery was something they were talking about even before the Civil War, because some groups wanted to abolish slavery in the North because it wasn't part of their economic model anymore. They didn't want to have slaves in the industrial model, because the industrial model was all about hiring workers and paying workers. And when you pay workers, it was a lot cheaper than owning slaves. Slaves cost money because you have to feed them, you have to clothe them, you have to house them. Whereas in the industrial model, it was a lot cheaper to pretty much have workers have their own homes and then just come to work for people. It was a lot cheaper for them to do it that way. So slavery was on its way out in some cases because it just wasn't economically beneficial. But Southerners wanted to maintain the old Southern tradition. And they wanted to maintain the old Southern tradition because that was part of their economic model. And they were fighting for that economic model, and that was the core reason why they seceded from the United States, because they wanted to establish their economic system and maintain their economic system. However, the North wanted to keep the United States as one country. And the reason why they wanted to keep the United States as one country, because they wanted to have the United States being able to trade with these other countries and do business as one country. Because Abraham Lincoln pretty much himself said that he only freed the slaves to preserve the Union. He did not free the slaves as some noble gesture. It was about preserving the Union. So it was done to preserve the Union. That was all the Civil War was about. It's about preserving the Union of the United States so they could maintain one direction for the country. However, people who have been miseducated through the years by white liberals and the dysfunctional school system will have you believe that the Civil War was all about slavery. It really wasn't a significant component to the Civil War. It was a component to the Civil War, but it wasn't a major component. The major component of the Civil War, the core reason why they were fighting the Civil War, was about economics. And this is something many black people don't understand, because many black people have been miseducated about the Civil War. And they're so miseducated, they don't even understand that after Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, there were Confederate black soldiers fighting in the Civil War. Yes, there were Confederate black soldiers. And for them, they think, again, from a liberal standpoint, where after Lincoln freed the slaves, all the Negroes went to go fight for the Union. Yes, there were many black people who fought for the Union. However, there were black people who fought for the Confederacy as well. And there were black supporters of the Confederacy. This is not a point people want presented in American history, and it's not one they want to talk about. There were black people who fought for the stars and bars, just like there were people fighting for the red, white, and blue. And they were all fighting, again, for their way of life and their economic system. They were fighting to maintain their economic system and to protect their economic system. And that economic system, even though it wasn't allocating resources fairly to black people in the South, that was all some black people had. And they were pretty much desperate to hold on to that. Whereas other black people saw this opportunity at freedom, and they decided to fight for the Union. And after the Civil War was over, what happened in many of these Confederate states is they had lost the war, and a lot of these state places, these were their local heroes because they fought for their country and they fought for their tradition and their way of life. So they erected monuments to their heroes as a way of trying to make a statement to their country. It's no different than what other people have done in other countries towards their heroes. And I look at this whole campaign by Your Black Lives Matter, and what they're trying to do is they're saying that it is racist for these statues to be there, but I thought this was America and it was about freedom of expression. What these people did when they established these monuments was they were expressing themselves freely and pretty much presenting what they see as their heroes. What Your Black Lives Matter wants to do is censor these people for having their heroes and their statues of their heroes and their history up. And what they're trying to do in many cases is try to revise history and say that this didn't happen. And that's really backwards when you think about it, because if you're going to say that taking the statue down is going to end racism, you're a complete idiot, because I look at these statues and I look at them as an opportunity to teach. They are an opportunity for people to learn more about this Civil War, and they're an opportunity for people to learn about racism. When you look at these symbols, they pretty much they are teaching moments, and they pretty much help us understand a part of history that many Americans are uncomfortable with, and a part of history many people just don't understand. Your Civil War was a very uncomfortable time. The country was divided, and the reasons for the country being divided, again, as were about economics, they were about economics. They were about money. But this is something most people aren't taught, because many of our public schools do a crap job of teaching American history. And in order to understand American history, and if you see it from the big picture like I have, you will understand that these statues really need to be there, because, again, that's just part of America's Constitution. It's a part of American history, and it's a part of teaching American history. If we don't have these statues there, then people aren't going to learn about the Civil War. They aren't going to get a big picture of the Civil War, and they aren't going to get a broader picture of the Civil War and what it was all about. No, if these statues are taken down, all we're going to get is a slanted picture of the Civil War, a biased picture of the Civil War, one that is inaccurate, one that is not educational, and one that is not constructive. You need to understand the Confederate part of the story, and you need to understand the Union part of the story. I mean, if you can say that you can take down statues of Robert E. Lee, then it should be okay to take down statues of Ulysses S. Grant. And that's something that what Your Black Lives Matter just doesn't understand. This is a slippery slope they're headed down. If we can take down one statue, then what's to say you can lead a campaign to take down another statue? Both of these statues and monuments need to remain there because they are a part of American history. And because they are a part of American history, they need to remain there so that future generations can learn from them. That's the reason why they established these monuments, so that people could learn their history. But Your Black Lives Matter would rather have people remain ignorant of their history so that white liberals can manipulate them and take advantage of them in the same way that they have been taken advantage of because they have been miseducated by our public school system. Now, when I was a kid growing up, I pretty much believed that false idea that Lincoln freed the slaves because he was doing it because he liked black people. And this was something that was passed around in black communities for many years. And it wasn't until I ran into a minority studies teacher who was an Afro-Cuban who pretty much told me the truth about the Civil War that I learned what the Civil War was really about. And after I learned the truth about the Civil War, I began to understand the bigger picture of the Civil War. And when he told me that Lincoln did not free the slaves to give them freedoms, as many black people believe, but to preserve the Union, I began to understand the bigger picture. And as I began to study the bigger picture of the Civil War, I began to understand all the reasons why America was in that Civil War. And as I understood those economic reasons, the picture became a lot clearer to me. Now, your Black Lives Matter doesn't want the picture to be clear because they really are some of the most ignorant people on the face of the earth. And they're going on what they were told and not doing their own research. Because those of us who have done their own research on the Civil War will tell you that these monuments really aren't something we really need to be fighting about or arguing about. They are there to teach black history and American history to people. And we need to be focused on more constructive things than trying to get a statue taken down. What we need to be focused on are things like getting jobs for black people, dealing with the gang issues in the black community, dealing with thug culture in the black community, and dealing with the dysfunctional culture led in the black community by black feminists and white liberals, and dealing with the narrative being dominated by these black feminists. You would think that would be part of Black Lives Matter agenda and their supporters' agenda, but no, they would rather go and try to revise the past in hopes of manipulating people in the future. You can pretty much, if you like this channel, you can support it by donating to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box, or you can buy one of my books on Amazon.com by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.